Hello, people. Welcome to the community of the Growth Mindset podcast. Guys, if you are a first time listener, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're listening from so that you don't miss on more interesting episodes coming up in following weeks. And for our daily listeners, here we are again with a new episode where we will interview another interesting personality from a unique industry and understand how they were able to accomplish this great level of success. Remember, this is a podcast where we learn easy, practical methods and tips that we can implement in our daily lives from the very best and the most successful people known today. Because as we all know, success leaves clues. And we, the people having the growth mindset, will use these clues to create a better, more fulfilling, and a successful life. So, let the growth begin. So first thing first, Krish, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Awesome. So Krish, first thing, for people who might not know you, right, on our podcast, would you just give us a little introduction or like what's your background like and where you're from?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Visakhapatnam in southeastern seaboard of India, Bay of Bengal coast. That was my early upbringing. Mm-hmm. I spent all my formidable years there. I did my MBA from Ghaziabad from the Institute of Management Technology. And then I migrated to the West in 1986. And so this has been my home since 1986. So more than half my life has now been in the West. But most of our family still lives in India. So I come to India about 4 or 5 times a year, and I've stayed in touch with my roots. But after I came to the West, I had the privilege of meeting a man named Zig Ziglar. I'd won a sales contest, and I was sent to hear him speak. And that 3 hours radically transformed my thought process, because if there was any difference in my life, it was that January 26th day, 1990. I remember it because it's Republic Day in India. And I think my background, to sum it up in a very simple way, is for the first 25 years of my life, I had assumptions about success. And when I met Mr. Ziglar, he made me challenge every assumption I held dear that was cultural, that was traditional, that was hierarchical, whatever it was. And suddenly the windows of hope opened up, and I realized that opportunity was there if you wanted to. Most people don't grow because they actually fear success, believe it or not.
Wow, interesting. So how did this happen? What exactly happened during that conversation with Zig Ziglar?
Well, there were about, I think, 1,800 people that evening. I was one of the people. I was writing down notes, and I remember just writing down frantically. He was an elder person. He was aged, and yet he was speaking with a simplicity. He was accomplished, but he was speaking with humility. He was at the top, but only wanted to reach down. He was ahead, but only wanted to pull you with him. And it challenged everything that I had ever learned. I had grown up in a system. I come from a middle-class family. My dad always worked for a living. I was not a very good student. I was always taught to compete. But in spite of the weight I carried on my shoulder that I would be a disappointment to my family, here was a total stranger speaking to me, giving me hope, telling me that I could be somebody if I just let go. He made a statement that night that was the most profound thing I'd ever heard. He said, you can either let your past beat you or you can let it teach you. Yesterday is important because it brought you to last night, but today is the first day of the rest of your life.
Wow, that's awesome. And did you get the chance to interact with Zig Ziglar himself? Did you work with him closely? Did that happen?
Oh, yeah. I ended up going to work for him in October of 91. I traveled with him for 17 years. I started with him as a telemarketer, and I eventually became his vice president of global operations. Awesome. I ended up writing a book with him. He endorsed my book. I'm still called their only global ambassador. They gave me an emeritus position when I left, and I wrote a lot of their curriculum, which they still use. So Mr. Ziglar trained me for what is something called the future skill attitude. 5 years before I wrote anything for him, he sent me to a writing seminar. He says, one day you'll write for me. 3 years before I became anything, he sent me to this saying, you know what? He says, I see in you something you can't see in yourself. So that's been my model. People I mentor, people I educate, people I equip. I always see their future where they can shine, not their present where they have doubts. So.
Interesting. So over these 17 years of experience with working with one of the greatest leaders out there, Zig Ziglar, right? If you had to summarize, or let's say 3 lessons that he taught you so that my listeners could also understand and benefit those. So what those 3 lessons gonna be?
And I've been asked this question different ways. Usually it comes as what is the one most important thing, but I like the way you put 3 because I learned many things from him. The first thing he told me was always be willing to compete, which means you have to believe you belong. Any environment. In fact, in one of my books, in the introduction he wrote, he says, there's no job I've given Krish that was so big that he said, this is beyond me. Yet there's no job that is so small where he said, this is beneath me. He approaches every task as if he believed he belonged, that he was supposed to do it. So the first thing was he always taught me to compete in any arena. Second, he always taught me to complete. He says, don't be an also-ran in many races, be someone who can complete a few of them. He taught me, he did not teach me activity, he taught me accomplishment. So first he taught me how to compete, next he taught me how to complete. But the third is probably the most important thing he taught me, which I hopefully have maintained. He says, always be consistent to those that communicate with you. So I have a rule. I'm always on a call 5 minutes before anybody. If I'm a Zoom call or even when I do my physical seminars, I'm always in the room before anybody gets there. And I practiced that for the last 27 years. Even today, I was on before you got on. That's just a habit. I don't do it to impress anybody. I do it because it's a principle he taught me, be consistent. And today, I'm consistent by habit. I cannot not be consistent. It's just a habit. I always show up early.
Wow, that's an awesome insight and a habit to accomplish, or to start with. I think that is something that even I should do, because once that thing instills in you, I believe it becomes more productive, and then you are more accountable when people reach out to you.
Yeah, and what happens is and the reason that principle is important is I remember coming late. Of course, I grew up in India, so being late is a birthright. So that's the one skill we export all over the world that doesn't work. So it's not just India. Every place I go where we gather, we are the most intellectually advanced species around the planet, but we're never on time. So one thing, I was late for an appointment with him by 5 minutes, and he looked at me and he said, son, you have asked me to help you, and I'm going to tell you something you're not going to appreciate. I said, what's that? He says, you're not late because it's culture, or you're not late because of any other thing. You're late because you're selfish. And I said, wow, that's an assault on character. Why would you call me selfish? He says, no, somewhere in your psyche when you woke up, you thought your time was either more important or as important as mine. Unless you believe that your time is less important than the person who you're meeting, you'll never be on time.
Wow. That's a whole different perspective to look at.
It is. I mean, it changes because, nobody wants character assault.
Exactly.
So when he said, I'm selfish, I said, listen, if you call me lazy, I can attribute it to my family or my upbringing or my community or my traffic But when you say character, that's individual. That's something I can do on my own. See, character is the ability to have pride in the mundane, which is what we do every day. And so that's the day I suddenly realized, the desire to be on time. Wow, what a way to look at it. Always think of your time as less valuable than the people who have invited you, and you'll never show up late.
Yeah, that's something that even I'm going to implement in my life now, starting to, change that up. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, going back to your expertise as well, you also deal with anthropology, right? So for people who might not understand what anthropology is, in simple words, how would you describe it?
Well, it's a Renaissance term. I think the origins of when it started first being used publicly was maybe in Germany in the middle 1800s, because up until that time, people just dealt with behavior as part of existence. But then when Darwin's evolutionary precepts came in, people wanted to challenge that, saying that, okay, so anthropology, if you break up the word, I mean, anthropologia is just the being, and then the logia is the logic of being, so to speak. So you look at it in the history of human behavior would be what would be called cultural or societal anthropology. Anatomical anthropology would be how the body changes over a period of time. Religious anthropology. So it has different tentacles to it, but basic behavior anthropology is how does our culture shape us? So I'll give you an example. J.D. Unwin, a British anthropologist, studied 88 civilizations, 88 people groups dating back to Greece and Mesopotamia, 5 major civilizations and about 80 different people groups. And he came to this conclusion on human behavior. He said, when a culture at mass decides to redefine something as simple as morality, which means our idea of moral law changes, within 4 generations, that culture will cease to be a superpower. And he proved it. Rome was never conquered from outside. It was conquered from within. Because of the debauchery of its orgies and all that, this great empire fell. England went by the same way. It's now just a tiny island off the coast of Europe, but at one time the sun never set on the Queen's empire. So he studies human behavior and attributes it to the rise and fall of civilizations. So I just take that down to individuals, saying that I grew up in Visakhapatnam. I have friends who grew up in India. I went through the same education system. I was not a good student. I never got into any of the good business schools because I could not crack the entrance exam. I never got into civil service. And as a result, by Indian standards, I'm a colossal failure because my grades were never good. And my father and mother did struggle with that because for them, success was comparison. It was not completion. It was how well have you done versus the neighbors. So I started studying this, saying what changed in my life? If my origin is the same, my upbringing is the same, my value systems are the same, why did I suddenly at the age of 30 decide to take a different look? And then I realized behavior is the result of habits. That's all.
Interesting. Now I want to understand this, right? How can people, or how does environment shape people's success, right, or their failures? Now let's say we look at US, we look at India, right? So how is this different? How is environment affecting individuals?
Yeah, an environment is, it goes back to when you look out of the window in the morning, and a window is just a wind door. I learned this yesterday from, it says a door through which both wind comes and light comes, right? So window is just a window. But if you look out of the window in the morning, and I'm talking about a figurative window, there are only 2 frames you can have. One is the aim frame and the other is the blame frame. The aim frame is possibility that today when I open the door, I'm not going to let yesterday dictate my success. I'm going to let today be a brand new beginning. So that's just the behavior you're going to exhibit and the habits that are going to carry you forward. So the motivation will get you going, but the habit of being motivated will take you there. But if you start with the blame frame, so I'll go back to the Indian context. I was raised in the mindset, culturally, religiously, theologically, of the karmic mindset, which is, my mother would, in Telugu, my mother would tell me, she says, Anta Maya, it's an all illusion. Or she says, she would tell me that my fate was written on my head. In Telugu, she would say, your fate is written on your head. And I said, what does that mean? She says, well, your past determines your present, and your past has already determined your present, which means you're rendered ineffective if you subscribe to the mindset that it is fatalistic and you are just living out your past, good or bad. And I grew up that way. It was not good, it was not bad, but superstition played away, tradition played away, and my brother came out of that same, my brother's a successful engineer, he lives in Europe, but he thinks differently. And so when I came to the West and Mr. Ziglar suddenly comes on the horizon and he says, you are the architect of your destiny. He says the very way you think about outcome will change the way you believe. Your belief now starts changing the habits you internalize. Your habits over a period of time become the new behavior you exhibit. Your behavior now shapes your character, and this character will reveal a new destiny. Suddenly he was telling me that the way I think changes everything. And he was right, because the way I think changed the way I was when I lived in India. The way I think now changes the way I am. Now, that doesn't mean when I come to India, I'm a different person. I'm still a son of the soil. I still respect my parents. I still touch my father-in-law's feet. I still have all the traditions that work. I have just jettisoned all the ones that don't.
Makes sense. No, 100%. This is really interesting because you do understand, right, at India, what exactly the current scenario is. So coming from that perspective and giving that perspective to others that, that, yeah, it all starts from your brain and then how you form those habits, those behaviors. Now, for let's say people who want to succeed in life, what is your
Mhm.
advice to them? What can they do to make sure they succeed in professional as well as personal lives?
Yeah, you change your definition. Success is not who you are in relation to where you were born or what you were born with. Success is who you are in relation to what you do with it.
Hmm.
Some people always ask me, where were you born? I said, the one similarity is we were all born close to our mother. After that, it all changes, right? So
True.
this morning I was talking to my father. My father is 86. My father
Hmm.
got his PhD at the age of 83 from Andhra University.
Wow.
At the age of 75, my father went back to school with his botany degree and started his MA. At the age of
Wow.
77, he started his PhD. And he graduated near the top of his class, and he's Dr. Dhanam now.
Wow.
But one day, my father asked me a question when he was attending one of my seminars, and I made a statement. I said, when your obligations to others finish, your obligations to your dreams remain. So, one thing about success is don't look, see, failure is not final, failure is not fatal. By the same token, throughout the history of humanity, failure has always been an event. It has not been a person. You can fail at something, you cannot fail as someone.
Yep.
So don't let your past failures dictate your future opportunities. It has nothing to do with anything. Um, Walt Disney came out of 7 failures, Hershey came out of 9. It doesn't, I mean, I can name 1,000 people. Failure is the foundation of success. If you don't know how to fail, when you fail, you'll fall harder than you failed before. If you failed once, you know how far you'll fall.
Makes sense. Makes
Failure
sense.
is actually the most beautiful foundation in the world. But when you grow up in a shame culture like we were raised, India is changing quite drastically. Yesterday, I watched a video and I was so happy to have watched it. It's a radio DJ and it's making the rounds now. It's gone viral. But this guy calls up a chacha of somebody who had, who kept calling his Batija and he kept calling his nephew saying that, you only got 52% marks. Why do you only get 52% marks? Why do you only get 52% marks? And he kept calling the nephew and kept calling the father and berating this guy. And the nephew called the radio station saying that I don't know what I can do with my life. Everybody is upset at me because I got 52% marks. So the radio DJ then calls the uncle and says, hey, I was talking to the vegetable guy down the street and he hasn't watered his vegetables. So what are you going to do about it? And this guy says, what can I do about it? He says, same thing. You cannot do anything about your nephew's marks. Quit calling him and bothering him. And he
Interesting.
just unloaded. Get that clip. Just type in India, Radio Mirchi, I think.
Okay. Okay. I'll do that.
It's a brilliant expose into the mindset because this guy said that we are robbing our youth of their dreams and their hopes and their aspirations because he asked that Chacha a question. He said, what is 70% of 312 or some number? And the Chacha said, I don't know. He says, that's it. Percentages don't matter.
Right off the bat.
So I suddenly realized that, man, I wish someone had taught this life because in my 10th standard, I got bare passing marks. My mother had to get me admission. I graduated from business school near the top of my class, but I did not qualify to be a doctor. I was never qualified to be an engineer. My brother's an engineer. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. But this morning when I was talking to my dad, he said, son, I listen to your podcast now, and I marvel at how you can weave complex concepts. He says, there are many doctors in the world, but I am so glad there's only one of my boy.
That is amazing. You made your dad proud, and he's also,
Yeah, he said, I'm so proud. He sends me feedback on my podcast every day. My dad listens to my podcast and takes notes.
Wow.
He
Wow.
says, he says, I was raised in India where the father-son relationship is so volatile.
True.
He says, I just wish people can see me now, that I can't wait to talk to my son every day to tell him that I took notes from him yesterday. I'm so proud to be a father.
That is awesome. That's a great relationship to have.
So
Where
that is, see, success is not monetary, it's not net worth, it is not hierarchy, it's not position. Success, John Maxwell says leadership is influence. And I think success is influence continued.
interesting. Now, how can people, develop these behaviors or habits? Now, let's say if I have a goal, I want to become something. A lot of people have goals of starting a business or doing something that they love. But according to you, what are some practical tips that people can do to make sure they achieve those goals and those dreams, and make sure they're also changing their behaviors and their patterns, because you understand human behavior?
The two principles that changed for me, and they're first is live your day by the clock, but your life with a vision.
Hmm.
Do what is needed today so that you can get through today, but make sure today contributes to tomorrow. Don't be a time plus matter plus chance. Don't be Mr. Ziglar used to say, don't be a wandering generality, be a meaningful specific.
Wow.
Okay, live your day by the clock, but your life with a vision. The second is understand that inspect what you expect. Another way to put that principle is measure what you treasure. You have to have benchmarks. So people say, I really want to write a book. I said, how many have you read last week? And they say, what's that got to do with anything? Well, you want to write a book because you want people to read how brilliant you are. But have you actually been consistent in reading how brilliant others are? See, I read on average, at any given time, I'm reading 5 different books, but on average, I read at least 1 book a week, and I've done that for the last 27 years.
Wow.
So writing my 5th book gives me great joy, but in that process, I've read over 5,000. Now, every day I wake up at 4 o'clock, non-negotiable discipline. Most of the times, I usually wake up at 5 in the morning. That's been my habit. But when this pandemic started, I started waking up at 4. I said, because for the first time in human history, the playing field is level. We are all virtual now. Everybody's working out of the house. Nobody has an advantage. Everybody's behind a computer or in front of a screen. So I said, if everybody has the same starting point, I want to be 1 hour early.
Wow.
Just discipline. So for 30 minutes in the morning, I'll read something that is inspirational to me, my devotion, my faith is centered to me. I'm an evangelical Christian, so I read my devotion. Then from 4:30 to 5, I will take some of the concepts from that devotion as an application that I can include in my podcast.
Wow.
From 5 to 5:30, I'll record my podcast. 6 o'clock, I go on my 5-mile walk. Every day I go on a 5-mile walk. One day I go on a 5-mile walk. One day I'll walk 30 minutes to the gym, work out there for an hour, and then walk back. I do that 6 days a week.
Wow.
Now, here's the most important principle I can give to people listening and watching on listening as far as success is concerned. The non-negotiable in success is personal discipline. Sybil Stanton, an author who wrote a book called The 25-Hour Woman, she said, discipline is not on your back needling you with imperatives. It's at your side encouraging you with incentives. The day you I add to that, the day you make yourself a slave to discipline, the world will open up to you.
Interesting.
But most successful people are boring, which means if you came to my house, I live in the same house. I've lived in the same house for 25 years. I can afford a bigger house, but I chose not to. Why? I use the Wesleyan model. Make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. So when this time's down, I was fortunate. We had some money put away, but I didn't just use my savings to keep my lifestyle up. I diminished my lifestyle and used my savings to help other people.
That's awesome.
So these are principles, these are habits of the heart. I'm not bragging on it. I'm a very modest person. We drive used cars. I live in a very small house. And the reason is, many years ago, a pastor in Australia gave me the principle of success. He says, always be learning that your yearning should never exceed your earning.
Those are some amazing principles. Like, wow, like these are things that I'll have to sit and, make notes of and, paste it on my wall, so that whenever I wake up, I see those things and that kind of reflects. Because the things that you're talking about, right? These are things that you have to reflect on, right? You have to think exactly, make sense as to what how are people able to achieve success, and how, if you implement this in our lives, you're able to, not just become successful, but also get a control of your own life.
Yeah, and I've given you so many principles, and that's the reason, I've worked at it for 30 years, but each one has taken me months to develop and learn.
Exactly.
All of them didn't happen at the same time. They happened over a period of time.
True.
But I'll give you a very simple illustration. I have an MBA. Now, IMT is a top 10 institute. It's quite well known. It's got branches all over the country. But back when I went, it was the only place that I could go to that didn't have an entrance exam.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got in. I would not get in today.
Okay.
I was, voted one of their top alumni and all that, but I wouldn't get in today. But so I've had the bookends of my academic career are okay because it ended up well. But if I look back over a period of time and all the different things that have manifested, the one thing I can realize is when I went to work for Mr. Ziglar, I'll never forget this illustration in my life. He was talking to me one day and he said, always be willing to do the unusual, always be willing to participate in the unnatural, always try to go in the places where it's unacceptable. And suddenly you'll realize, so what he was saying is be a contrarian, be opposite, but be programmed. So I put that away at the back of my head. And in talking one day, he was sharing with people, he says, Krish, do you know that I do better when my shoes are shined? And it's an old habit. They taught this in the NCC or the Sea Cadet Corps, or, in our PT in school, they would say, if your shoes are shined, you feel better. So shine your shoes before you come to school. So I just thought, so one day we were in a hotel in rural Iowa, and I walked up to his room and I knocked on his door. It was 10 o'clock. And I said, Mr. Ziglar, I saw a shoe shine guy downstairs, and I asked him if he'd stay open for another 15 minutes. And he said he would. I said, so I'm going to go and I'd like to take your shoes and get them shined. So he says, why would you want to do that? I said, I couldn't help but notice that when we came off the plane today, your shoe had a small scuff mark on it. And you told me that you do better when your shoes are shined. So if I get your shoes shined, tomorrow you'll do better in the front of the group. And I'm the one who sells books and tapes at the back. So if you do better in front of the group, I'll sell more product at the back of the group. We'll make more money. I'll make a better commission. So I tied his having shoes shined to my outcome.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a radical thought. Unnatural. It's unacceptable. It's unexplored. And so he gave me his shoes. And then everywhere we went, he would tell the story. He says, here's a boy with a master's degree who knocked on my door at 10 o'clock asking me to shine my shoes. He'll go far in life. Many years later, when he got Alzheimer's and was forgetting who he was, I was the only one he would allow to take him to the bathroom and lean on me, because it was pride and dignity at that point. Yeah. So I tell people, I said, when you take someone's shoes to be shined when you don't need to, they'll lean on you when they have to.
Interesting. Wow, those are amazing insights. I mean, yeah. Now, in terms of understanding behavior and how our beliefs are formed, how do you think these are formed in the first place, and how can one break these beliefs, like practical tips to break these beliefs, and then follow up with habits? How to make sure that those habits are also formed? How can people do that?
Hey, I'm a communication guy and I teach communication. So wherever in the world I go, for example, I teach people that accents are not genetic, they're geographic.
Yes.
So if after 4 generations in a place you have an accent, it's just a choice. So I'm speaking to some person who's come from Poland, I say, listen, if you're thinking in Polish, then you'll speak with a Polish accent. If you think in English, you'll speak with a bridged accent, whatever it is. Same way, habits are not genetic. Habits are not cultural. Excuses are. Which happens is, and the reason I say that is, if you say habit is a culture or habit is, because when I first used to come to India and share these ideas in the early 90s, people would say, but this is India. So I say, yeah, what difference does that make? I mean, nobody asks Indra Nui that question as the chairwoman of the most powerful company in the world. Nobody asked Nadella that when he became CEO of Google. Nobody asked these people these questions because they have now risen to the top of the profession. So why can't it be anyone else? Why are there so many software engineers, but only one like him emerges? That's
True.
the question to ask yourself.
Exactly.
So the people say, oh, well, there's only one job and then, the good guys will get it. No, the question to ask is, if there's only one job, why shouldn't you get it?
True.
The difference between you and the other guy is nothing. He began on the same side of the street as you. He had the same upbringing as you, the same ideas as you. So any behavior that needs to be changed begins with the 3 steps to anything. First is unlearn what hasn't worked. Relearn what has always worked. And learn what is needed to work.
Interesting.
Unlearn, relearn, learn. Now, interestingly, when I shared this principle on a podcast last week, someone sent me a text message and said, Mr. Dhanam, that's a great URL. Unlearn, relearn, learn.
That's interesting.
So I'm giving that guy credit. It wasn't my idea, but that is a brilliant new tactic. Unlearn what has not worked. So let me give you an illustration. I teach by example. It's always my style. When I was growing up in India, and you'll understand this, my mother used to give me a coconut. And I actually wrote about this. I called it the principle of the coconut. My mother would give me a coconut, and on my way to Timpani School on Visakhapatnam on that slope, there was a temple there, and my mother would say, take this coconut and go to that temple, give it to the guy who's running the temple. He'll break the coconut. He'll use half of it as an offering. He'll keep half of it as a blessing, and he'll bless the other half and give it back to you. So he'll use the water as an offering, keep half and return half. So dutifully, I did that because I was an obedient son and I was steeped in tradition. I didn't understand what the coconut had to do with anything, but I understand it had to do with making my mom happy.
Yeah.
But then temptation is something that doesn't care for happiness. Temptation is always steeped in pleasure because, see, happiness depends on happenings. Pleasure depends on immediate gratification. Joy is unending, right? So there are 3 different components. So my friend comes into my life and he wants pleasure, which is immediate. He says, hey, I see you have a coconut. The best part of the coconut is the water.
Yeah.
And if you give it to that fellow, he's using it up and nobody's getting the water. He's giving it to God. We don't know if God drinks it or not. And it's true. Suddenly he's put a thought in my mind, does God really need my coconut water? God created the universe. He has enough coconut water, right? So my mind is playing these games with me. So my friend then brings a hammer. He says, I'll break the coconut. We'll drink the water, which is the best part. He says, we'll eat half the coconut. I'll bless the other half and you take it back to your mother. Nobody knows. So I did that for the next couple of years.
Wow.
My mother always thought that the coconut was being blessed. Tradition was continuing. Habits were being formed. Joy was, everybody was happy. I got married and I went and I confessed to my mother. I said, Amma, you remember the coconut? She said, yeah. I said, for the last 6 years, Vicky was breaking the coconut and he was giving you, it was his blessings, not the guy at the temple. Here's what my mother said. And people in India, when I share the story, are just amazed. They all laugh. My mother said, Ayo, that's why we've been having all this bad luck. She didn't even know. So the principle here is, success will always elude you if you have never categorically decided to unlearn that which has derailed you. Success will always elude you if you have never categorically unlearned what has derailed you. So
makes sense. Okay. And what does genes have to do with people's, or maybe you could say health or success? Does that also contribute?
Yeah, genetically, I think, man is tridimensional by nature. We are mental, we're physical, and we're spiritual. Mental is our intellectual acumen, which means I know a friend of mine who decided to go to England to study medicine. His parents were very proud of him in the village, and they tell everybody that our son is a doctor in London. He left the school because he didn't want to study medicine, but he went and joined the London School of Economics. He came away to America and he went on to become president of Bank One.
Wow.
International. But his parents thought he was a doctor. And he never told them that he had become a banker because their image of a doctor was higher than a banker, exactly, even though he was the most leading financial person in the West of a major bank. Correct. But he shares the story, and he lives in Dallas, but he's quite an interesting story. And the reason I share that is part of our success narrative, our mental narrative, is our genetics can come. I mean, you can get some amount of intelligence familially. I do believe that. I believe your environment supports that. For example, my father's brother was a very brilliant man, but none of us got his mathematical ability. He was the only one who was a PhD in physics, but all of us struggled mathematics. But when we sat next to him, he would make it look so easy. My uncle was so brilliant. He was a physics professor. In fact, you may recognize the name N. Subramaniam. He wrote many of the books of physics.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Yeah, Subramaniam and Brijlal. Subramaniam is my pednana, my father's older brother.
Wow. I never knew that. That's crazy.
Yeah, so Dr. Subramaniam, when we would sit in a train, he would hear the sound of the rail, and by through sound could tell you how, by using a formula, tell you how fast the train was going. He wrote books on acoustics and all. But so any of us that was supposed to, who were failing, would always be sent to him over the summer for tuitions. And he invested in us to the degree, but he was so brilliant. Our marks did go up just being around him, because he would always say it's always the formula. My teachers never said that. So the environment in India, teachers only wanted to get you to get the right answer.
Exactly.
So my Penana was he was very keen that you understood the why of the problem. The Indian education system is predicated on the how.
Yep.
Just arrive at the answer, I don't care. Exactly. So genetics does play some part, environment does play some part, but success, I have seen people come from the wrong side of the tracks and make it to the very top. I've seen people culturally with every advantage end up in jail. I've done prison ministry for 25 years.
Wow.
I go into the prisons of America and teach people. And one time when I was in the state of Tennessee, I met a guy who was a trauma surgeon from a very prestigious university who was given 13 years in prison because of a sexual action against a patient, which means he violated a code of ethics. He was guilty of it. He served his time. But he was a blue-eyed boy. He had 2 BMWs in his garage. He had a beautiful wife and beautiful children and a big house. And now he can't practice medicine. So I've seen it happen both sides. Culture does play a part. But the thing that is common to both the very wealthy and the very poor, the very affluent and the very miserable, the very educated and the very illiterate, is a moral law. This is non-negotiable. Anybody can get the moral law, because a moral law comes from a moral lawgiver. And that is God.
Yeah.
And so the perception of God is what mandates, because I say, do you have to be theological? No. You have to believe that there is something outside of you that can give you intellect, that can give you. So Ravi Zacharias, a man who I admire, always would say, he says that every worldview out there has to explain origin. Where do I come from? Everyone has to understand destiny. Where am I going? Everybody has to find purpose. What am I doing here? And everybody has to accept morality. Is there a right and a wrong? So when you have origin, morality, purpose, and destiny, that becomes the bookends to the commonality of believing that, you know what, there's 7.8 billion people now on planet Earth, but God in his infinite wisdom only made one you.
Wow, that's awesome. It's a very good perspective and, things to start from. And what I love the most about, our conversation so far is, you and I have kind of the same belief system. Like, I also personally believe where, you need to focus on all these 3 parts of your life: mental, physical, and spiritual. Now, once all of these 3 are in balance, right, you feel that, everything around you is for a cause, and you are also living your life to the fullest. You're contributing to the society. You are at peace with yourself. Now, for people who want to have a good work-life balance, or make sure they are in touch with the infinite wisdom, whatever they want to call it, right? How can they manage all these 3 together? Any tips that you think that could help them manage this?
First, you segment your day, and without 3, you have to start with 2. You break your day into skill and will. For 8 to 10 hours of the day, you practice the skill that you need to make a good living. But for the rest of the time, you invest in the will that allows you to have a good life. There's a difference between standard of living and quality of life.
Yeah.
when you focus on quality of life, standard of living always improves. If you only focus on standard of living, quality of life never goes up. I've met people who are very, very wealthy, but they're lonely and broken. Their relationships struggle. Their children have wandered. There is disease. There is doubt. There is despondence. So invest mutually in the skill and will. I have a formula for this. I call it GLOW, G-L-O-W. And this is something I've learned over a period of time. And I tell you, if you glow, if you follow the formula, you'll have that complete work-life balance. Give more than you have. The G stands for give more than you have. So when this pandemic started, a couple of people called me from India, said, we're locked up. At least in the US, you're allowed to walk around a little bit. We go for our morning walk. We're in shutdown. Our offices are closed. But how do you give more than you have? I said, can you get to your compound wall of your apartment? They said, yeah. I said, are you allowed to get some supplies into your house? They said, yeah. I said, do you have a migrant crisis that's going by your house, which means people are walking by your house trying to get somewhere? They said, yeah. I said, reach out over your compound wall if you can and hand out bottles of water and packets of glucose biscuits. Start small. Give more than you have.
Yeah.
Don't give because you have to. Don't give because you're able to. Just give more than you have. This is Mother Teresa. When Mother Teresa picked up the people from the streets of Calcutta, she writes in her Nobel Prize winning speech, she talked about a man she picked up whose body was riddled with maggots. The face was the only part that was not covered with maggots. He had been lying on the streets, body was stuck to the asphalt. But he said to her as he passed away that evening, he says, I have lived the life of a dog, but I'm going to die looking into the eyes of an angel.
Wow.
So give more than you have. Second, leave more than you take. This is Mr. Ziglar's principle. You can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. So one thing, for example, I never say no to somebody who invites me to do anything. I always leave more than I have, and I always prepare. Like this morning, I have my notes here for you. I got your note, your questions from me. I came 30 minutes earlier. I sat and I went over your questions, so I just won't ramble aimlessly. So I'll have some semblance. Always leave more than you take. And I hope that's our feeling. When you finish here, you say, okay, he accepted my invite because a friend of his said, but he really gave me value. I want you to think that about me. And if I don't, then give me another chance, right? So first, give more than you have, leave more than you take. Third, very important, offer praise to the inner circle. The O stands for make sure you're applauding those on whose shoulders you have stood. So I call my father every day. When I was 7, my dad found out I had a sense of humor. He said, son, we're living a life of quiet desperation. Promise me you'll always make me laugh. And so every day I try to make my dad laugh at least once. I call him every day. My mom passed away a couple of years ago. So day before yesterday, I sent him a little thing I put on LinkedIn saying, your mind is a terrible thing to waste and your waste is a terrible thing to mind.
That's crazy.
So my dad said, I showed it to all my friends in the retirement community. So offer praise to the inner circle. Reach out to your parents, your siblings. Better yet, John Maxwell calls this the law of the inner circle. Every week, I send at least 15 texts to people in my Rolodex. People who have just this is not even my inner circle, but 15 people every week I just send, hey, thinking about you, praying for you, hope all is well, blessings. I don't ask for anything. I don't expect anything. Invariably, one of them will call back and say, thanks for praying about me. I'm going through a tough time. Can you talk? Fine. So that's the outside. But the concept of always praising those on whose shoulders you stand is built in this premise. If you take care of the ripples in your life, the tsunamis will take care of themselves.
Yeah, very true.
Perfect the ripples. Perfect what you can see. Don't worry about it. And it's another principle. You go as far as you can see. When you get there, you can see further. Don't expect the end while you're still in the middle, right? So give more than you have, leave more than you take, offer praise to the inner circle. And the W stands for understand whose applause matters. Whose applause matters. For me, as an evangelical Christian, I wait, and at least this is what we are taught in our biblical belief, that when your journey is over and you come to heaven's gate, God will tell you, well done, my good and faithful servant. Wow. And that's all I want to hear. So whose applause matter for me is the applause of heaven.
Perfect. Wow, those are some deep words, and I'm definitely going to implement glow in my life. That's a great, synonym, you could say, a short word that can actually help you align a lot of things together. That's perfect. If I could ask you, Krish, in terms of books, you read a lot of books right now, right? If I could
Sure.
ask you your two favorite books which you would recommend others, it could be in personal or professional life that could help people. What those two books gonna be?
Yeah, so the first, I mean, of course, outside of scripture, which is the Bible, outside of those, the two best books I would recommend. The first book is, of course, See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. See You at the Top. Then the best book the version of the best book that has helped me change my leadership style and my success arsenal is Developing the Leader Within You by John Maxwell. Developing the Leader Within You. But if you can get the workbook version of that, because the book was written and then they wrote a workbook version, which is you can then look at those principles and take it in a first person present tense by internalizing those principles. So those would be the two. Then Stairway to Success. But in the list I send you, there are about 25 books on there.
Awesome. That'll be great. And this is a question, that I know we are coming to the end of the interview and you are very punctual with time. So the last question that I have for you is, you understand, right, the importance of developing a mindset, developing a growth mindset wherein that could help you lead a better life, successful life, both professionally and personally. So what can people do? Let's say one top thing people can do to develop the growth mindset.
The first thing I would do is, we call it future skill attitude. And again, everything I do has a formula for it. So the principle that you have is, make sure that every day you're spending at least 30 minutes to preparing for tomorrow. Every day, make sure you're doing some activity physically to keep yourself physically alert for the now. Every day you're doing something to keep yourself mentally alert, to keep yourself physically alert. But 30 minutes you're investing in tomorrow, 30 minutes of activity today. Then have a benchmark, which means have a 5 things that you want to accomplish. And then at the end of every day, you have to make a check mark next to whether you did something towards each of those 5. So if you have short range goals that are goals you want to accomplish in 6 months, or medium range goals that'll take 2 years, or long range, whatever your goal is, you have to break your goal down into daily activity. The checklist of benchmarking is where we fail. Mr. Ziglar used to say, earthquakes and hurricanes get all the publicity. Termites do more damage.
Yep.
So we want, T20 is good because we only count the number of sixes in the T20.
Correct.
But nobody ever talks into all the batting practice that goes into, you can't just go up to the crease at 6 o'clock that evening under the lights and launch one out of Wankhede Stadium. It's not going to happen. You have to swing to get that shoulder strength. So that activity precedes accomplishment. Okay, so every day do something for tomorrow. Every day do something for today, and then make sure you have a checklist that every night you check, saying, hey, I did something towards my goals in each of the areas that are important. Now, here's the beauty. If you miss one day, that's okay. If you miss 2 days, if 3 days you don't have any check mark, then you're not going, so that's why benchmarking is important. You have to look at your list every day.
Makes sense. Okay. And this is one last question that I ask almost every guest on my podcast, right? So you'll have to imagine this now. Let's say 20 years from now, 30 years, 40 years from now, right? It's time for you to pass on and, go to the next level, the next dimension, right? And you could only give 2 advices to your kids to lead a happy and a successful life. Only 2 advice. What those 2 advice are going to be?
Don't delay your belief in dreams. Don't delay your belief in dreams, because what will happen is the universe doesn't suffocate because you hold your breath.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. Life goes on. And this second principle comes from my friend Vicky Hitchcock, who said, when you arrive at the end of your journey, there are only 2 statements you can make. I wish I had, or I'm glad I did. I wish I had is one of regret. I'm glad I did is one of fulfillment. Every day, live your life that when you arrive at the end, you can proudly say, I'm glad I did.
Makes sense. Perfect. So, thank you so much, Mr. Krish, for taking your time out and joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast. The wisdom you have given us with science-based facts and hacks, I think this will definitely benefit a lot of listeners, which can help them go to the next level. So, I really appreciate you taking your time out. Really means a lot.